comfortable and why she said yes, she would see me, but she felt like I had given her that valid conversation, you know?
And that what you've just beautifully described is what one of my favourite philosophers described as, well, she didn't describe it, I describe her approach as the proximity approach.
Mhm.
You know, that the person would never consider herself comfortable to come and see you. And that was based on a whole bunch of assumptions about you and ideas that she held about you and about the culture that you represent and so on and so forth. But when she got close to you and actually learnt who you are as a human being, she changed because she understood. And that's proximity, isn't it? When we actually gain proximity to one another, all of our assumptions and prejudices are challenged. Assumptions and prejudices are not wrong by definition, but they are by definition things that ought to be challenged and questioned. That's what an assumption is. I'll indulge myself for 5 minutes and just tell you about Simone Weil. Topped the class in the French philosophy exam, same year as Simone de Beauvoir and others sat the exam. Strange person, Simone Weil. Quite isolated in a sense, socially isolated, never had a relationship, never got married, any of that sort of thing. She, not that that's strange, just that she distinguished herself from her peers in that, you know, the existentialists who were around her were all into all kinds of social experiment and relationship. She was deeply concerned to pursue her own concern, and that was to understand the spiritual dynamics of the people she was writing about. She was a communist. She thought the answer to Europe's troubles after the First World War was communism. And she wrote all kinds of philosophy about that. Then she thought she'd better check whether the people she was writing about were actually who she was suggesting they were actually thinking the things she was suggesting they might think. She was writing about the proletariat, the working class, you know. So she left her job as a teacher and went and worked for a year in the Renault factory in Paris, and discovered there that the proletariat was so busy just trying to feed their families that that communist revolution was not even within their radar. It was the intellectuals who were talking about communist revolution. She was a pacifist. She enlisted and fought against the nationalists in the Spanish Civil War so she could understand what was going on. Her principle was proximity. If you want to understand, you get close. You go and actually experience. You recognise your assumptions. Oh, for me, Muslims are this, this, this and this. I'm not going to accept that about myself. Like, I know that about myself. I know that they're my assumptions. I ask why they're my assumptions, where they're coming from, where I got them from, how they reside in me, and then I go and get close to some Muslim people and check. I check whether my assumptions are correct or incorrect, and I gain understanding. Almost invariably, my assumptions and prejudices are at least, to some degree, in error, because they're based on things that people have said to me, or the media have stereotyped as, or, you know. And Simone Weil, from that perspective, was I think one of the most important European philosophers of last century. And her concern for proximity actually killed her in the end. She refused to eat anything more than what she perceived that people who were fighting on the front in the Second World War were eating. And she became sick, and she needed to eat more than that, but she refused, and she died. So her best book is called Liberty and Oppression, and her name is spelled like this. Weil, pronounce it. So it's a little book, and it's essentially a critique of Marxism and capitalism. But she's a ripper in terms of the philosophical approach that we bring to this space. All right, let's just spend a little bit of time looking at some of these videos, and I'll kind of explain to you what's going through my consciousness. This happened last year, as you can see by my clean-shaven face.
Hi everyone.
I've copped a bit of flack for filming while I'm driving.
A community called Orison's Rest. It's actually the house where the wonderful Indigenous artist Lynn Onus used to live. So some really deep spiritual connections with the Australian story in this place. This little community practiced women's spirituality. And, you know, apart from meeting one of the wonderful people who's part of this community, I know very little about it. So as I drive to this little place, there are all kinds of feelings and emotions going through me. There's the usual nervousness that accompanies meeting new people, coming to a new place. But there's also the wondering about who are they? How do they perceive of the world? What is their sense of meaning? And how do I relate to that as I come in and are welcomed by them and receive their hospitality? I'm just driving up.
So I've kind of explained to you what's going on for me a bit there, but what I want you to notice specifically and pay attention to is the process that I'm putting myself through. I'm actually becoming, before I get there, I'm intentionally making myself aware of what's going on in me. And that actually starts for you before you make initial contact. A journal is a great tool for you. It's not an assessment task, but I would suggest to you that you go down to your local journal shop and buy yourself a little journal that you think you're going to feel comfortable writing in for the duration of the unit, and use it. Carry it with you throughout the unit, and the premise of that is I will pay attention to myself. I will consciously ask myself, how am I? What's going on in me in this context? I'm just about to pick up the phone and ring blah 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 blah, and this is what's happening in my body. When I was in the car there, I said, you know, the usual anxiousness and so on. I was expressing that as a feeling. That's how I'm feeling. Feelings are the theatre of the mind. Yeah. I was feeling it as an emotion. The emotion is what's happening in here. And when I'm about to meet brand new people or walk into an unfamiliar situation, I can feel my whole body tensing up. There's a kind of a, you know, it's like I'm ready for action. It's my amygdala's going wah wah wah. You know, be ready for anything. You don't know who these people are. You might want to run away. Take note of that stuff in yourself, because it will be part of your immersion report. This is because you're trying to understand these emotions and these feelings and where they come from, and they'll be different with different communities, because you might actually be far more comfortable with Buddhists. In fact, most Australians are way more comfortable with Buddhists than they are with Muslims. What's that about? Where does that come from? Why do I feel more nervous going to the mosque than I do going to the temple? That's about me. It's not about the other people. It's entirely about me and where that's coming from in me. And I need to understand that stuff if I'm actually going to be able to pay attention. Ask questions, interrupt.
Okay, here we are at Orison's Rest. I'm just about to come into the community. This lovely little house. Hello, Omi. Oh, it's so good to see you.
It's our honour to welcome you to our sacred community.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this very much. And it's great to finally be here. Yeah. Tell me, what is this beautiful welcome you've got here for us?
So we have grandfather sage.
Mm.
This is a cleansing prayer that our community offers.
Mm.
And so when you
You certainly may. Thank you.
Sky Father above, Mother Earth beneath our feet, and to all our actions, we give thanks for this. Give thanks for the sacred presence that you are sharing with us this day. Sky Father, please connect us with the visions and understandings that we are seeking. Pray the beautiful body of divine light. Connect us with all. Divine life is in all things, and so on our way to give thanks to our ancestor tree, for the spirit of this land which has been held by Barinja Linonis and his family. Many sacred gatherings have been held on this land that we're welcoming you to.
Thank you.
All right, how are you feeling?
I'm wondering what you were feeling.
Good question.
In the sense of
Yeah.
that balancing of wanting to engage in the experience,
Yep.
but also understand that, where were you at in the process of just saying, I'm just going to let it be and be part of this, and I'm trying to understand and appreciate and
Yeah.
cognitively. How was that for you?
Yeah. So I was bodily, emotionally, I was still nervous. I felt the strangeness of the environment and the welcome. Intellectually, I was curious. So I was feeling curious. I was, being a theologian, I was intellectually wanting to engage with the idea, you know. So this was right from the very beginning. The dialogue or the monologue from her, the prayer monologue, was grounded in the spirit of earth, which is traditionally problematic for the Christian religion, and yet not problematic for me intellectually. So I was feeling this kind of, my tradition is so much a part of my human development that it's actually embodied in every cell. I can feel it, you know. So before there's any intellectual engagement with this person or this spirituality, my body is saying, I'm in an odd place. This is not my place. Now that's important for two reasons, and that's what I was experiencing then. One, firstly, it's important that I recognise who I am and who they are, and that I allow that difference to be. So I don't just come in and pretend that I'm exactly the same as them. Hey, we're all the same, because we're not. So hold that and honour that, and that's okay. That's what I was attempting to do, but I can still, I can feel that I sort of quipped about the amygdala, but there is that bodily sense of I'm in an odd place for me. I'm not normally in this place. I grew up in the Dandenong Ranges, my head filled with stories of Satanists dancing through Sherbrooke Forest committing human sacrifices. You know, that's what the stories that used to be told amongst Christians in the neighbourhood that I lived. I don't know whether they're true or not, but they were true for me, and they went in somewhere and they were still there. Even though up here they weren't there, I had to recognise that they were still there in here. And I could feel that response. I'm walking into, they didn't describe themselves as Wicca, but anywhere else you go online and you find a women's circle like that, it's usually described as Wicca of some description. Yeah, that's not the way they thought of themselves, but that's that kind of earth women's religion. So, yeah, it was an emotionally tense experience, and yet it's like a palimpsest. Do you know what a palimpsest is? It's like when an artist does a painting and then they run out of money to buy any more canvases, so they just paint over the top of the old one, and they keep painting over the top and over the top, so you end up with layers and layers and layers of different paintings all on one canvas. And that, you know, art researchers spend, you know, years peeling back layers of paint to find out what's beneath some of these palimpsests. And that can happen to us emotionally as well. We can have conflicting or multiple different emotional responses at the same time. And so the other emotional response I had was to the smell of the sage. An immediate, visceral, embodied response, which was embrace. Have you smelled burning sage? It's beautiful. It's really, really nurturing. Well, for me, this anyway. You might have a completely different sense of smell. That's all right. So just because it's nurturing to me doesn't mean it's going to be nurturing to you, but that's what I experienced straight away. So my question to her, so tell me about this, actually rose out of my immediate felt sense of the smell of the sage and the fact that she was holding it there, and I wanted that emerged into my consciousness as an immediate question: what's this? You know, what's going to happen?
How did she feel about your recording?
That was all pre-arranged and all okay. Yeah. So.
I mean, I presumed it was
Yeah.
pre-arranged, but I
Yeah,
didn't
sorry.
wonder how she...
Yeah. So I checked when I asked whether they'd be happy for me to come and film.
Yeah.
They met as a community and discussed that and came back to me and said, it's pretty rare for a Christian academic to knock on our door asking to know about us and experience our religion in a non-judgmental way. Bring it on, you know, so come. Yeah, really, really delighted. And I think that's one of the things I've experienced in all of the visits that I've done, is that as soon as people get that you are there to hear them, not to try and change them, layers of barrier start to fall apart, kind of like your experience, you know. And suddenly there's this more immediate intersubjective human engagement going on that's not kind of barriered by agenda. But you've got to deal with the agenda first. You've got to actually get close enough to actually enable a person to realise that you're not coming with an agenda to convert them or to judge them or to do the dirty on them. You know, write a story in the local paper and say how awful the local mosque was, and you know, you're actually there to be present to them and to learn about them and learn from them. And this moment of standing before this tree and acknowledging, how many trees do we walk past without acknowledging in a day? Thousands. We stood and we became present to this tree that had been there for who knows how many years, and acknowledged it as part of the spiritual dynamic of that place. And that's an argument that's been going on in the Christian and Hebrew traditions since Abram built an altar next to the trees of Mamre. Do you remember that story in Genesis? Abram comes into the land of Canaan, comes across the trees of Mamre. What are the trees of Mamre? An ancient, sacred Canaanite site of worship. What does he do? Cut them down and say, anathema, awful, horrible. it builds an altar to his God right next to them, recognising the sacredness of the trees of Mamre, of the people of that land. And later he actually states it. Remember when Melchizedek comes out to thank Abram for chasing off his enemies? We could probably read this story. It's a great interfaith story. Abram calls God in that conversation El Elyon. El was the Canaanite god, the Canaanite word for God. Elyon was the early Hebrew word for God. Abram deliberately calls God El Elyon, saying, your God and my God have met. It appears that they're the same God. That's one of the readings of it. Really challenging story for a new connection between two different people groups with two different religions. Because then, because we go on in the biblical narrative, and the Hebrew religion and the Canaanite religion become, very, very against one another. There are all kinds of subversive texts in Genesis that it's worth reading. But I've got to be careful not to preach. All right. Any other questions about that? Did you have a feeling? Like when you watched me being prayed for, what were your emotional or feeling responses?
Mine was...
Yeah. Oh no, she's praying for me.
Yeah, I actually thought, I'm not sure I'd be able to stand here.
No.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure I'd physically still be standing here going, I'm not okay with this.
Yeah. Good. Notice that? Absolutely.
I just felt, oh yeah, there goes my prejudice.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Out it comes, but then it was
Okay.
like, I then turning it around, it was because, I don't know if you've been writing, but I've been writing because I think, well, this can all go in it, because actually viewing you do it is part of the process.
Yeah.
And, but this is very real for her.
Yeah.
This is, very real, and who am I to interfere with my thoughts and my, you know what I mean? It was just this real idea, no, I actually have to look at this, and she is very genuine and very real in what she's doing, and I need to respect her in the fact that she is honouring something that she believes in, it's just,
At the risk of it's not digressing, because it's absolutely connected to what you're saying. Paul Tillich, and I'll give you some readings from Paul Tillich, who's a theologian who's very, very useful in this space. He speaks of faith as different to belief. So we all have beliefs. Beliefs are headspace. They're the way we think about what we have faith in. It's language, symbol, ritual, so on. So you have belief, and he talks about sort of belief as using the metaphor of kind of what's at the surface of our spirituality, of our spiritual life. And there are, of course, all kinds of different ways of expressing beliefs, and that's what religions are. They're different ways of expressing what we believe. He says, underneath belief is faith. What is faith? It's different to assenting to particular ideas or symbols or ways of speaking. He calls it ultimate concern. Or in other places he calls it the ultimate question. And this place that he calls faith is the place in the human person that arises when the human person interacts with the world and recognises that there is nothing perfect in the world. Everything is conflicted. Existence is limited in that sense. And in our contact with the limited world, there arises in us a question. What is the meaning of this? Where's it all going? Is there something that's a final destination or something that is perfect? I experience human relationship to be deeply good and life-affirming in most cases, but I feel its limitations. I love this idea, but when I take it to its extreme, I can see its problems, its limitations. So he says everything in existence is limited in that And so what we encounter in ourselves when we encounter the limitedness of existence is a question. And that question is our ultimate concern. It becomes actually the thing that we orient our life around. We start to, almost in a sense, pursue the underlying meaning of existence in pursuit of the ultimate meaning of life, God. In his view, that's the symbol for that stuff, the language symbol was God, or being itself. And this is something that you can't experience in existence. And he got a lot of flack because he said, God doesn't exist. Actually, what does that mean? Well, what he meant was not that God isn't, but that you will never fully encounter God within existence, because everything in existence is limited. And what we're actually questing after, what we're concerned for, is the unlimited nature of the source of all life, God. He said, that's faith. So you can have a bunch of people in one room with various different beliefs, symbols, languages, all of whom share ultimate concern, the ultimate question. And so when I come and meet Omi, I have a radically different set of beliefs, radically different set of symbols and language, almost to the point perhaps where we can't even recognise one another in a religious space. And yet, what you named then, Ruth, was in this space. What I could sense in Omi was a genuine, deep concern for the ultimate reality of life. And for her, it was rooted in earth and, matter and so on.
It actually challenged me, the fact that I'm thinking, as a Christian, am I as thankful as she is?
Okay, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Just that thankfulness for this and thankfulness for that, and that real, I'm thinking, goodness me, am I that thankful? To who I believe,
Yeah.
God, what God has given us, it says to be thankful, but am I?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. So you're articulating a willingness to learn about yourself in encounter with other. And I used to, the same as you, the Muslim guys at Sanctuary, it was, their prayer life was extraordinary compared to mine, and I was always deeply challenged by their devotion, because, yeah, because, I'm really a thoroughly secular Jesus follower. A lot of my spirituality resides in reason, reflection, silence, questioning, doubt. In that sense, I'm a product of Western European Christianity, and that's a very different space to that. And so I get to learn about myself when I look at someone else as well. Okay, so this was I don't want to spend too much time with this, but
We're about to go in and meet everyone. Omi's
This was
about
an
to
interesting
introduce
moment.
us, so thank you, Omi. Let's go. Hello.
Beautiful.
Hello, everyone. Hello, I'm Chris. Great to meet you.
Really lovely to meet.
This is a beautiful, peaceful space. Thank you. Yeah.
This is Zoritza.
Hello, Zoritza. And you're spinning. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful.
And this is little sister Hayley.
Hello, Hayley.
Who's been born into the folds of a conscious sisterhood.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for welcoming me.
can you hear my concern to be affirming and, coming out in my language? Beautiful, beautiful, lovely, delightful. I'm kind of overdoing it a bit, I'm nervous as all get out because I'm walking into a room of people I've never met before. I have no idea what they're expecting of me. I don't know who they will be, what they will want to do, how they will want to engage with me. that's a pretty vulnerable place to be in, and I was feeling it then. And so one of my ways of dealing with that is showering affirmation on other people, which can sometimes be a mechanism of distancing myself from people. Now, I'm becoming aware of that because I'm thinking about it. I'm reflecting on it. What was going on for me there? And I can come up with certain ideas like that. You know, was I actually putting up a nice safe barrier by making sure everyone knew that I thought they were amazing and so on, or not? If I'm not sure, when I go to supervision, I can say to Libby, now Libby, when this happened in my encounter, I was feeling like this, and I'm wrestling because I'm wondering whether this is what it means in me. And Libby can then go with you there. And your peers say, yeah, I'm hearing this, or maybe this, have you considered that, you know? There's an opportunity to check your reading of yourself. So you don't make assumptions about yourself either. I'll skip forward a bit.
One of the sisters has a lot of facial hair.
Yes, and that was what my immediate, that's great pickup, you know, like, oh, this is a circle of women, and yet here's this awesome guru-looking guy, you know, like he's the classic guru guy.
Because when you said how are we feeling, I was, as you approached, I was very aware of, and I don't know if it was yours or my masculinity coming into the initial, and when we came around the corner and I spotted him, there was this, for me, there was this magnetic pull of, another safe, a bloke.
And that's really important to notice, because he was there very much as a guest, a fellow traveller, but not part of the circle.
Okay.
Because the circle was based, the main foundation of the circle is menstruation cycles. So, men are, by definition, excluded. And they're unashamedly excluded from the circle of women. They're welcomed as fellow travellers, as this guy was, and welcome to be part of the conversation, but when the women are in circle, it's women and girls. And so, there was throughout this whole visit that sense of, I am a guest here. I can never actually be part of this community in a full sense of the word. And is that a problem for me? Like, you know, and I asked the question later on in the conversation, so, you know, what about men? You know, because I just, for your sake, for students' sake, although I better ask the question. And the response is powerful and profound. There's not, in any sense, a desire to exclude men, but there is a strong sense of the spiritual power of womanhood in connection with the earth. And for me, when I checked all that stuff in myself, I began to really deeply value that, because I come from a tradition that is profoundly patriarchal and still clings on to the assumption of male power. This was a beautiful challenge to that. Any other questions? That was a really important moment for me, because I was like pretty tense.
How did you feel, like Shannon said, when you saw that man? Did you feel similar?
I was surprised. I actually, so immediately questions popped into my mind. Who is he? What is he, you know? Why is he here? What place does he have in the community? Does he assume some kind of authority because he's a man? Or do they give him some kind of authority because he's a man? I wanted to know those things immediately, because I was so surprised at his presence there. I'd been told this is a circle of women. And so I actually perceived, I think my most visceral response to his presence was one of threat initially. I don't know if it was maybe there's some kind of animal competitiveness going on there. Don't know. If it is, it's pretty pre-rational. It's right down in the, you know, the kind of core. But it became pretty clear pretty quickly that he was just a fellow traveller in there as a guest. and had a very similar spirituality, but was expected to express it and practice it somewhere else differently. Men would never be invited into circle. So,
Can I add my personal response
Yeah.
when I saw the man?
yeah,
I just got anxious.
Yeah,
Why
right.
is he there? Why is there a man there?
yeah,
Like what? I don't know. What's he gonna do? Like, isn't this meant to be women?
Yeah.
Why is he there?
yeah.
I thought he was Hayley's father.
Right.
I went, oh, okay.
Yeah.
He must be,
Yeah,
yeah, that she must belong to him and it must
Yeah.
be.
yeah.
I thought he was like the head.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought, oh, he's
Like
the
a
man,
male.
and I almost didn't want to, sort
Yep.
of like the others are safer, but
Yep.
he's like the head, so.
And where did that come from in you, do you think?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of that.
Yeah.
I don't know, possibly the church.
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't brought up in the church,
Yeah.
having come to it as an adult, but
Yeah,
possibly.
yeah.
Or, I don't know, just like dad's the head of home.
Right.
Home.
Yeah, it's not only the church that's
No.
patriarchal in our culture.
No, men are always in authority, I
Yeah.
guess.
Look at the Liberal Party. Oh, sorry, no, I didn't mean to single anyone out. But, I mean, it is. It's a cultural
Yeah.
assumption that we hold that men will assume positions of power in any gathering.
It's in most cultures.
Yeah.
It's in every culture, isn't it?
Do you feel safe in that feeling? In that, not that feeling, in that, with that cultural ingrainedness in you?
Oh, that's a really complex question to answer because I'm a middle class, well, yeah, depends what you classify as middle class, but essentially I'm a middle class white male in a society that confers the most power on that demographic. And in fact, that's worldwide. So I'm part of the demographic that holds the most power in the world. And so as someone who's grown up in that and who's actually been invited to collude with that cultural assumption through my whole life, that stuff is so deeply embedded in me that I'm not even aware of half of it. So there'll be ways that I behave that I'm not aware of that just exude male power, white male power. And the knowledge that that's the case unsettles me profoundly. And I spend a lot of time in my life, and particularly in my relationship with my wife, trying to untangle myself from that. So often, if I'm in a little round conversation with, I'm here, Kate's there, and there's, say, a man talking to us. This happened when we visited a church recently. Lovely man, greeted us, had a great conversation. Throughout this 20 minutes or so of conversation, his gaze usually rested on me. So he made eye contact with me most of the time. Now, I've become aware of this because I've forced myself to become, well, not forced, but I've engaged myself in critical reflective understanding. And it disturbs me that when there's a woman and two men, the men will usually make eye contact. So I spent most of that conversation more conscious of that than I did of what he was saying, what we were talking about. And regularly, deliberately broke eye contact so that he would look at Kate. Not because I was trying to condescend to Kate, but because Kate and I consider ourselves to be equals. And if I am going to actually invest in that consideration, as the person with the embedded power, I need to do something about it, because she's not in a position to break the power collusion that's going on between me and this guy. I'm the one who has to break that. But can you hear how complicated it is? It's really complex because there's stuff that I'll do that I'm not even aware of. Mansplaining. Do you know what mansplaining is? It's really embarrassing.
What is it? Oh, sorry, I don't know.
Well, mansplaining is when you've got a group and you might have, say, 5 women, a couple of men, and the man starts explaining something to everyone, mainly to the women, that he assumes he knows more about. Without checking the assumption that there's probably 3 or 4 women in the group who are way smarter than he is. right across this stuff.
That's true.
And so he sets about making sure everyone knows what they need to know, you know, and because he's a man and because he's white, people collude with him. Yeah. And there's another layer of that, and this comes through psychological analysis of boards that's been done. There's been a bit of research done on the psychology of board meetings and so on. And that is that most men, when they bring an idea to the board, are emotionally invested in it, and it's connected to their identity. So if you criticise it, you criticise the person. Most women, it's not across the board, but most women know how to separate the idea from their own identity. And so they're able to engage in critical, robust conversation about the idea without feeling a sense of personal affront or offence, or that they've lost their masculinity or their femininity or whatever it is that they're invested in. So there's all these different complex ways.
What's that? Is there a particular research paper?
I can
Love
get-
to show my husband.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be in trouble now.
I often have this discussion with him. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
poor
yeah.
guy.
Yeah. I'll get Kate to dig it up. It's interesting stuff. Kate used to be the manager of spiritual care at Eastern Health, and so was on all kinds of high-level strategic meetings in Eastern Health, and yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. Yeah. So there was a time, you'll see a bit later on in the meeting, that the women all go out and they leave the two of us together. Have you seen that bit? You might not have, and he does a face reading. You know, like a face reading? Like what? Half an hour he took, and all of my scepticism was just leaking out all over the place. I don't know if he could feel it or if it's even.
Oh, literally, this was a practice. It wasn't just, he was just trying to work you
No,
out.
no. He said, "Would you like me to do a face?" He said, "I do face readings." And I said, "Do you?" He said, "Yeah, I do face readings. Would you like me to do one for you?" And I was like, "No." Yeah, sure. Okay, no worries. You know, I'm the teacher. I need to show the students what to do.
Just quickly, what is a face reading?
Oh, should we? We've got to have
you
lunch.
don't have to show me. Just
Yeah, no. Come on. We've got to have lunch in a moment, but.
Yeah, I'm not into this one yet.
Okay, so he's going to do a face reading.
I'm here with Ken, who we've already met, and I've asked Ken to sit with me. We're going to sit in conversation together.
You can see it. You can feel it.
His
I'm
way
into
of
this, man.
listening deeply with another person. So we invite you to share with us as we share together. Ken, would you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Oh, that's the
perhaps
boring
a
bit.
special day.
I go for Abraham himself.
No, we don't want more videos.
Which I did like tunnel.
He just tells us about himself for a bit. We don't want to waste time with that for the time being. Come on, Sterling Wi-Fi. Here we
So
go.
your nose comes down and it's quite pointed, and it gets to a point, so you get to the point quite broad here. You have that ability to hold that there in the heart. And the eyes are really nice to the So your eyes from the chest, how you feel about it. So what you think comes down here, oh, it's a little dip there, right? It drops in there, so the thoughts come down before they go down into the identity to go make the point. It goes to the bath, the heart.
Yeah.
You add feeling to it.
Yeah.
So you won't just go straight from your head like the first time. This is a hard-nosed businessman. His nose will feel like it comes like a bone out of his head and goes straight down. So what he thinks is identity, he'll just go like this, like this. Man, you got that heart. No, I'm here to do business. I don't care about feelings, I care about heart. Hard-nosed business. So it's got a little dip like that. They will drop through there to give a bit of heart to it and say, okay, feel about that first before it comes down, before you make your point. I know it's quite broad, so I cover a lot of ground. I'm very giving.
How you feeling?
I'm trying to feel my nose.
Thank heavens.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also almost a cultural, like a racist almost thing, because different cultures have certain noses.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
What's he saying about, you know, entire
Yeah.
culture?
Yep, so there are a bunch of kind of assumptions in what he's doing, yeah. Any other responses?
Oh, I don't know if it's sad.
Go on! You can't learn if you're not, you know.
Is that recording? Should we pause that?
We can, you wanna pause it? We can pause it, sorry folks.